beware Romulans bearing gifts.
This is Carl.
This is Sean.
This is newly appointed Red Shirt Ike, reporting for duty, captains.
And welcome back. This is Romulans bearing gifts, not gifs. And the first new recording in at least 2 or 3, or I don't know how many months. It's been a while.
Welcome back, Eric. Welcome back.
Thank you. It feels good to be back in this chair. Definitely, I don't know about the rest of you guys here, but I know me and Caleb have been itching to record anything Star Trek. He informed me because I guess he keeps notes for all our, what do you call them? Oh my God, I've been out of broadcasting so long, I don't remember what you call it.
Broadcasting.
No, what do you...
Okay, Mr. Rogers.
No, what do you call those meetings they have in broadcasting? Like,
Let's do a writer's room meeting.
Not a writer's room. It's where you talk about show notes, show prep. I don't know. I've been out of it too long. But in the back room, in the producer's hutch, Caleb has reminded me because he takes meeting notes. Caleb's been wanting Ike to join the crew, partly just to be on the show, but also because Caleb is also anticipating when someday we start talking about Trek films on the podcast. Because ever since that was teased eons ago, he wanted Ike to join us for that as well. So he wanted to get him in, get him comfortable. And then according to Caleb's meeting minutes, I had said ages ago that maybe on episode 100 of RBG. So we still got a ways to go. And these are all weird arbitrary rules. Like, I wouldn't even have remembered I had said that if Caleb just didn't tell me recently.
I really prefer the Red Lobster rolls to arbitrary rolls.
For those who haven't been listening to the Best Picture podcast, Novice Elitist, etc. with Sean, sometime around New Year's last year, Sean entered his dad joke era.
It's been here for a while.
If you've only been listening to RBG, this is what's been happening. I don't know what it is. We're going back to Voyager. Sweet Voyager. Everyone's favorite show. I was hoping Kat would come out of her den for this one because...
Okay, I've got a question for you guys. Because I've seen a few episodes of the original one. I've seen all of Star Trek The Next Generation and a little bit of Deep Space Nine. And I'd already burned off of it by the time Voyager came around. Is Voyager considered... Can you tell me, okay, obviously the best would be the OG. Do fans generally regard Voyager as one of the better series? Or is it down there with Star Trek Enterprise?
The quick answer is it's down there like Star Trek Enterprise. However, like all Star Trek series, it has an interesting break where there are a couple of episodes in the earlier seasons that are okay and that are, really strong. And then kind of, it's a little, and then it jumps up strangely about the time that 7 of 9 appeared on the show. Now again, I'm only partially joking about this because you know how I adore 7 of 9, but they actually did something where they revved things up a bit with the show about the time that the Borg and she showed up. So There's a revitalization within Voyager because it was kind of vanilla early on, and it was having problems. So yeah, that's the quick answer.
Okay.
I tried to make a cat noise. I'm talking about Cat, the co-host, while rolling my eyes because I just had Sci-Fi Party Line PTSD because this has come up a million times.
It's true.
Now that I recall, someone mentions Voyager, and then Carl says it got good when 7 and 9 showed up, which is not wrong, but it's just been raised so much on SFPL, and I can just...
Well, I mean, look, it always... The question, when you think about the different Star Trek series, it's healthy to realize that they have ebbs and flows, right? Original series, first, 2 seasons, we're doing really good. And then there are some issues. Next generation, about the time they got collars, that's when things take off. Before the collars, you're like, what in the world? After the collars, he's like, all right. DS9, when Cisco goes bald. There are all these breaks where it's like, what am I watching? And then they catch it, and then they figure things out. And so it happens. Now, Enterprise, I'm still not sure exactly when Enterprise, where that break was at Enterprise. But anyway, so whenever you are talking about Star Trek series, you just have to respect that there are these windows where if you pop in, if it's a newbie, and they drop in episode 2, Next Generation season 1, they're going to be like, "What are you all talking about? Why are you making me watch this?" So you gotta frame it properly to let folks know these series you grow into them, and they there are windows where it's not so hot, but then there are these windows when it finally catches and it really starts doing its thing. That is my.
I know exactly what you're talking about because obviously I'm a Doctor Who fan, and if you want to talk about a show with eras, that is it. But when you're talking, I'm actually picturing something like Buffy that started out kind of and just fucking took off like Santa's sleigh on steroids, because that just exponentially got better and better. I think the same might be true of other shows like Dexter, but yeah.
Well, I just wanted to go back to the original question and say my piece, but I wanted to hear what Carl was going to say first, which, from my perspective overall, my gauge of the franchise, if I have one, it's definitely not in the top tier. And I'm trying to keep my personal opinion of Voyager out of it, but it's definitely not top tier. I think with fans in general who have been with the show at least since TNG or prior, Voyager was the time when the cracks were starting to show in the franchise, the wheels were starting to come off, at least on the television side. Because First Contact is like beloved amongst Trek fans. The movie, which came out around the same time, but it was sort of like the beginning of the end of the decline, the steady decline in overall fandom appeal for Star Trek. But I don't usually hear people regard Voyager nearly as badly as they speak on Enterprise. And also, there's a certain group of people that, I don't know if they came on to Star Trek with Voyager or they were just really happy with the fandom in general at the time it was on television. There's a certain group out there who just really love this show. Like, all the different crews on the main shows, obviously each one is like a family in of itself, but there's something, I don't know, there's something about Voyager and their family dynamic as a crew. I just feel like their hardcore fans have a different flavor and point to different things that they enjoy about that show compared to if you ask people who like hardcore love TOS or hardcore TNG or DS9. They're just, it's like a subset of Trekkies who really adore Voyager, I believe.
I think that's a fair assessment. We good? That makes sense, Sean?
Yes. That's shoot. That's more than I needed.
That's what we go for. That's how we roll on this show.
Yeah, it's not the same thing, but it's like there's these Doctor Who fans who love the McCoy era for some reason. And Voyager is not the McCoy era of Star Trek, not at all. But I'm just saying, like,
hipsters.
Certain people are just drawn to it.
I don't get it myself. But
we are doing season 2, episode 16.
A murderer with no remorse
We must have had some motive.
I didn't like the way he looked at me.
pushes Tuvok to the edge.
I want the truth.
Deep inside every man
My mind to your mind.
lies an animal waiting to be freed.
I'll kill him for you.
But between good and evil, logic has no jurisdiction
I am no longer fit for duty.
on the next Star Trek Voyager.
And before I ask Ike the big question, because he's the one who chose this, I'm just going to say, when I sat down to look it up, to check out what we were going to discuss, and I saw season 2, because of what Carl just said, I said, oh no, in my head. This is season 2 Voyager. Like, I was already trepidatious going into this. But, Ike, you chose this. I didn't even know you had really watched much Voyager. And so I was a little surprised. I didn't know if you were just picking this because you just started watching the show and this was interesting to you, or I have no idea. Why did you choose this episode?
The backstory. Years ago, probably like 10-ish years ago, I was watching somebody else review this show instead, and they were arguing that they were not a big fan, to put it lightly, of 7 of 9, and they instead were thinking that this character in this episode was a much more well-written character and had potential to be, I guess the 7 of 9 had, or early on in Voyager. I have no prior history with Voyager. I haven't even watched Next Generation fully. I'm a big fan, of course, of TOS and of the animated series as well, of course. But yeah, this one has always stuck with me because it's just I've always been fascinated by it, especially with the title character, not Meld, of course, but the special guest star, of course. I think there's bits to chew on here, and we'll get into that later. Does that satisfy your answer?
Yeah, I just so you had seen that someone else reviewed this 10 years ago. Did you watch it back then 10 years ago? And so
No, I did not.
Oh, so this is your first time
Indeed.
actually watching the episode yourself.
Yes.
what year did this come out?
96.
Okay.
Yep, February 5th.
Okay. Interesting. All right.
Yeah, I remember those days. And because of the date, and I remember a lot from back then, I'm pretty sure I saw this when it originally aired, and I've never seen it again until now. This was not an episode that I revisited or really caught in reruns like I did some Voyager before. So this is my first viewing myself since 96. Let's see. Sean, I don't know how... It sounds like you haven't really watched any Voyager either.
I've been in people's houses when it's playing in the background.
There's a resounding endorsement, sir. Resounding endorsement of the series.
I remember sitting in someone's kitchen one time, and somebody came in and made an announcement, well, we're back at war with the Klingons. And I was like, oh, what? And then they said, oh, we're watching Star Trek Voyager. I may be wrong. It may be something else, another Star Trek show. I knew that it starred, of course, Mrs. Columbo.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And I like her. I've always liked Kate Mulgrew, because the first thing I think I saw her in was the Trekkies documentary. And she's very memorable to me because she starts crying at one point when she's talking about, visiting sick kids in the hospital. But this is actually the first episode of Star Trek Voyager I've ever seen.
This is fun,
Yeah.
I think. We'll see for me and Carl, because it sounds like both of you, this is your initiation into... Okay, so for both of you, did you know going in just the basic premise of Voyager?
I don't know. I don't know what you mean. You mean the fact that they're going home from like a long trip?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so you didn't know that.
Well, it must take them a long time because what is this, 8 seasons? What took them so long?
Yeah, 7. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, 7 seasons.
Okay, so yeah, again, this is quite the exercise because there's so much context for Voyager relative to the other series, as well as the story that's going on within it. So if you're really just kind of dropping into Voyager, understanding what's going on gives it some additional context, which is basically Starfleet ship gets thrown crazy far out, in the galaxy, and they have to, find their way back home. And with the best technology, maximum warp, it would take them something like 70 years. So they're trying to adhere to Starfleet principles, being the only ship. They can't talk to anybody. It's them by themselves out there trying to make it back, maintain their ideals as Starfleet and do whatever they can to try to get that ship and that crew back home. That is effectively what's going on with all of Voyager.
That sounds, now I'm not going to say complicated, but setting that sort of rule book down in the quote unquote writer's Bible presents future writers with quite a challenge.
See, that's one of the interesting things that they were doing with Star Trek at this time, because when DS9 came out, we're going to create Star Trek where there's no spaceship in it. It's just, we're not going anywhere. It's going to be on this. What? How could that be Star Trek? So they were doing these exercises where they would put a limit on, they would put a limit on what the idea of the show was, and then they would develop some aspect of it relative to that. With Deep Space Nine, it was supposed to be, interpersonal relationships. It was supposed to be understanding culture, that kind of thing, instead of swashbuckling and exploring space on ships. And so the fact that Star Trek was supposed to have the narrative space to hold that kind of universe in it, even though they weren't flying around in spaceships and blowing stuff up every week, was the exercise of that series. So when Voyager came around, again, we had our swashbuckling original series, then we had our somewhat more staid but equally exploratory Next Generation. Then came Deep Space Nine, where we're going to say, hey, we got a space station and it's all about the people and the dynamics. What? How could this be Star Trek? Exploration. It turned out they did all right with that. And so then comes Voyager, where they're like, all right, it's one Starfleet ship by itself, way out on the edge of space, trying to find its way home. Can we preserve the ideals of Starfleet? Can they make it back home? This was the exercise. So that's the idea.
Yeah, I know we're not doing necessarily a history lesson, but I can't help but join in a little bit because, I remember some of the things they were saying in promotion, like the year leading up to the premiere of Voyager. And, around the time TNG ended, myself, like many other Trekkies, were at peak fandom for the franchise. Like that's when Star Trek was really peaking again. Right when TNG ended and they had their first movie. And, I was excited for every new thing. And of course we had DS9 already, which I was into, even though it was before DS9 got really good. But then they said Voyager. And I remember them saying multiple times before the show came out that part of the reasoning behind this premise of throwing them out there on their own was that, especially the Enterprise D and TNG, they're like the biggest, most powerful ship. They're always dealing with like the big, because of the flagship, they're dealing with like the biggest Federation fiascos all the time and all the politics of the Alpha Quadrant and etc. And that by throwing Voyager out on its own with the smaller ship out there on the edge of the galaxy, they were trying to harken back to the days of TOS when Kirk and company were basically charting new space for the Federation, never knowing what they were going to encounter, etc. So I remember getting excited by them promoting it that way. But then after the gangbuster 2-episode premiere, it just felt like TNG again at first to me. And I was like, this is weird. Like I was expecting something more different, but it just felt like TNG. But anyway, that's what I have to say about. And Ike, were you aware of this premise in general for Voyager?
Briefly, I also have a big Trekkie friend as well, and he has kind of, You didn't give every single ounce of information that you've given, every detail there. I do plan to watch most of the series with him because why not? It gives him an excuse to watch it again, of course. But he was like you guys as well, watching this live when it was airing at the time. I knew briefly that these guys briefly, of course. Yeah, Voyager gets the ship. I assume it's what class is it exactly?
Voyager class, I think.
Voyager class. Sorry,
How lame.
Dumb question. No, stupid question.
No, they don't usually do that. And I mean, yeah, it was was it the first to be named after, the class? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it was
on screen anyway.
It was a brand new ship, and it was state of the art. So was.
And then another thing I want to ask the noobs before we get into the meat and potatoes of the actual story. Now, they mention it, of course, many times in this episode, but did you guys understand what this dynamic was with Federation types and Maquis types on the ship?
No.
Ike?
Is it to do with different regions of space that said individuals are from? Like Federation obviously refers to those part of the Federation Alliance.
I'll let Carl take this answer because he might be more concise than me.
Of course.
Yeah, no, that's a reasonable guess. It turns out it's revealed in the first episodes of the series Voyager that basically there is a terrorist organization that is trying to infiltrate the Federation. And again, I don't want to give away too much. The veterans know all of this, but Voyager at the very beginning of this series is infiltrated by this terrorist group. And so it's Federation, and then there are these terrorists, and they're on board the ship with God knows what, idea these terrorists are up to. And then Voyager gets thrown out to the far edges of space, which means the captain, knowing that these terrorist folks are a part of the ship, but she needs them to keep the ship running, she's got to create a crew out of Starfleet and these terrorists to keep the ship running and to try to get everybody home.
I see.
Early in the series, there's this dynamic and this tension between the undercover terrorists. Well, we know who they are, but, they are dislike of Starfleet and the issues that they were having. And then the Starfleet folks that were trying to round them up and, throw them in jail when all of this stuff happened. So this crew is made up of a combination of these two teams of folks that initially, I assume, Starfleet was trying to set them up to catch them, and then they get thrown out here, and now they got to work together. So that is what is going on. That's Suter and some of the other crew were Maquis, which is not, it's not like a particular planet, or it's a group of folks from different places, but they shared an ideology. They are, they are trying to get comfortable serving under Starfleet rule on this ship so they can get home. And so they're still working it out during this episode. Are you, upset at me because I'm Starfleet? You're just going to throw me in jail anyway. That's what's going on. So that's very interesting. And again, Star Trek in general has lots of subtleties and lots of complexities and layers inside of layers. So, if you're giving Voyager a shot, it's got some ebbs and flows, but a lot happens.
Yeah.
And so,
not to get hyperbolic and timely, but I'll make everyone uncomfortable for a moment. It'd be like, with a terrible metaphor, it'd be like if there were these Hamas freedom fighters and pro-Palestinian American college students, and there was this other group of IDF soldiers and supporters who are obviously having issues with each other in the Federation world at this time, but a group of each gets sent to some alien location where everyone else is not human and maybe good, maybe bad, maybe in the middle. And these Hamas freedom fighters and these IDF guys decide it's in their best interest to just go ahead and become one group. So I'm being hyperbolic, but you can imagine the tension, because obviously it's Star Trek in the 90s on television, so it's not that intense. But if you really think about it, like Carl said, they're like this rogue, like terrorist group, and they actually join forces. So if you take the premise seriously, that's crazy.
Yeah. So that's the background that all of this stuff is going on within. And again, Eric, you hit it, right, nail on the head there. Because this is 90s television, what we're describing is generating a sense of tension that would make a lot of sense. And you're like, wow, they could do a whole lot with that in the series. They don't do a whole lot with that. And they bring it up, but there's some real visceral things that, if they did it now, you would really feel that tension and a lot of excitement and a lot of stress because of that. They play it very safe with early seasons of Voyager. And so although we are giving you the context of what's going on, what should have been, is what is written, you don't feel it the way you should. And so, we're trying to give you context. And again, when you start to watch it, you'll see what we mean. But that is, it was ripe for plot twists and excitement and some very interesting things that they could have done with it. It comes up sadly infrequently, and they miss many opportunities that they could do a lot more with it.
It's funny, we've never discussed this, like on SFPL or any of the podcasts we did before. We've never actually drilled down on Voyager and gotten into the nuts and bolts of it, because most of us in prior podcasts, we've all seen this stuff before. We all get it. It's weird to analyze it now, kind of for the first time, because I realize I could do a whole entire podcast and more just on this subject now that we've started to talk about it. But we're not going to do that.
We're trying not to do that. And the other thing is we genuinely want your opinion about this. Again, we're all jaded and we've seen it start to finish and relative to the other series. So, we've got all kinds of baggage attached to it. I'm really curious what you all thought of this episode. We're trying to give you context, but, what did you think?
I'm going to start off with something negative, and Ike, you can add to this if you want, but I have one complaint. My major complaint about this is I don't like the theme, the credit sequence.
Okay, all right. Look,
no comment.
Look, it's been a long road.
Hey, I like that one more.
From there, y'all have seen some stuff. All right, look. Okay. Besides the theme, what do you think of the episode?
Hold on. I just want to say on the theme, just to make Sean feel like that wasn't in vain. I feel you, Sean. I liked it initially when the show premiered, but Star Trek television Star Trek in those days was already starting to get, in my opinion, very repetitive with the themes and the music, and kind of sound alikey, and so it got old for me really quick. And it's actually, if I remember, I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but it was written by Jerry Goldsmith's son, I believe.
Well, Mozart wrote his first symphony at the age of 10, but no one's fucking heard of it. Just anyway, yes, sound alikies. I think we have some of them in our bathroom. We call the exterminator. But you want to know what I thought of this? I liked this for the most part. I thought this was great. There's a great story. It involves some concepts, that I've sort of heard of before. I like Brad Dourif. He, of course, is horror royalty. He's not only been in an Alien film, but of course, everybody knows he's the voice of Chucky, the killer doll.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. All those movies, I think he was the voice of Chucky. I don't think there was a single one that he bowed out. I really, Eric knows this, but I really like killer shit, like... like
that's why I thought this was perfect when I started watching it.
Yeah,
I went in not remembering what this was going to be.
And I'm like, I didn't know that Ike that you had chosen this. This seemed like something Eric would choose because it was going to be a murder mystery or something. And he's like, "Oh, I want to hear what Sean has to say about this."
It was perfect.
But I'm glad it wasn't really a murder mystery. But there was a lot of influence here. One of the reasons I asked what year it came out was that there's the really glaring hit you over the head with a hammer Silence of the Lambs reference, which it kind of comes across to me as really tired. But there was one thing as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this sort of has the same plot as the movie Talk to Me. Or no, Talk to Her. What is it, Eric? Y'all know.
Which, are you talking about the movie that came out this year?
Yeah, the one that you just recently saw.
Talk to Me.
Talk to Me. Okay. There's this process, they become addicted to it, and as a result, it's like a drug. The more, bad things start to happen.
Oh, this is... So I just watched this movie, Talk to Me, for the first time because Kayla recommended it to me months ago, and I just watched it for myself the first time like 2 or 3 days ago, and I never made the connection until Sean just spoke it into existence. Yeah, it is like that. That movie's brilliant, by the way.
I'm not a huge fan, but that's
Wow.
a topic for another. I'm not saying, of course, that this is unoriginal at all, but that it also brings up the nature of psychopathy. Is it nurture or is it nature? But that's touched on a little bit here, because it's quite possible, I think, with Suitor?
Yes, Lon Suitor is his name. Yes,
Okay.
DER.
He obviously has been, since the war, he's been suppressing some sort of PTSD or these violent tendencies. But I understand that Tuvok cannot handle this. It's not logical. So at some point, the dam is just going to break, which is why he tears apart his room. It kind of reminds me of like the werewolf, like, oh, I know I'm going to be turning into a wolf. Lock me in my house, put padlocks on it and all that. So I enjoyed those aspects. That's it. I mean, it's not really that deep. But, oh, by the way, Brad Dourif is excellent. He was my favorite bit. And am I thinking that this character was in an episode of Strange New Worlds that we watched for this podcast? Or am I dreaming that?
You're dreaming that.
Okay. All right. Never mind.
Different timeline.
And that's all I have to say for now. I'm sorry. I don't want to be like Mrs. Peacock at the dinner table in Clue, but it's so nice to meet each other. Yes. Okay.
Ike, initial thoughts on this?
You got me red-handed. This is pretty much why I wanted to review this one, not just because I had prior, not full history, but I technically had seen this before through somebody else's eyes, of course. But yes, it was rife with interesting idea, kind of taking the idea of the mind meld itself and the Vulcan physiology and psychology itself of being completely rational and logical, and trying for them to crack the nut that is this one character who has an inexplicable irrationality to kill somebody, but not just because he looked at him a different way, not even because he did anything wrong to him prior to that, or again, he's part of the terrorist organization or whatever it is. There's something wrong here. The wires are crossed in his brain and something's obviously going on with his head, and to have these two individuals cross and make a story out of it is definitely fascinating, and that's why I wanted to bring it to discussion today.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question for you guys. I remember with Star Trek The Next Generation, I subscribed to the Columbia House VHS library. So I get one cassette a month. I wrote a check for $25, literally, and sent it off to Columbia House. And slowly and eventually I watched Star Trek The Next Generation. They had 2 episodes on each tape. And I noticed a pattern. one episode would be like maybe an action-based episode, more of a conflict with outsiders, something like that. And the other episode would always have a message, like an after-school special, like it would be about abortion or gay rights or, interpreting the law to its literal letter, like don't walk on the grass, and Wesley Crusher fucking walks on the grass and then they're going to kill him. I remember that one as being just utterly ridiculous, not because of the story, but the visuals.
Oh, but the babes were hot.
Yeah.
In that story.
But does Voyager kind of have that same pattern where they seesaw or flip flop between two types of stories?
Well, Star Trek always had an after-school special kind of moral thing happening in it. So, I don't know if it is quite as balanced in Voyager as you are describing. Like one episode is here, one episode is there. There's always some kind of message. There's always something in the episodes. So I guess the quick answer is yes, but perhaps you don't see it ping-ponging quite the way that you did in Next Gen, because Voyager's a bit more confined in scope in terms of what they're doing.
It's kind of like, I would describe it as, if you listen to Radio Free Skaro talk about Doctor Who, and they talk about, whether they're talking about the classic series or the new series, the way Radio Free Skaro discusses the season of Doctor Who is they'll say, oh, they spent all the money in that episode, and then they saved money with these episodes in the season, and then they saved what they had left. Yeah. Well, Star Trek, especially, the original shows, and even the new shows, yeah, they were very much in that paradigm, and you could tell, oh, they spent money on this one, so yeah, they're going to have the whole Borg and all these new ships you've never seen, and like phasers going off, hand phasers, I mean. And then you have these kind of episodes. And I guess since we're on this subject, I was going to say on this topic, thoughts I had, which were, seeing this episode, it reminds me of what they could really do with, because, this is essentially a bottle episode. Like, we didn't think of all these as bottle episodes back in the day of TNG and DS9 and Voyager, because these were fairly common, and it was just kind of like, yeah, it's just regular Trek. But I was thinking about, after I watched this and I thought about the whole bottle episode dynamic, I was thinking about how we've covered Strange New Worlds, the 2 seasons that are out, and because things have changed to a degree with modern shows, like there was like around 1.5 episode per season of Strange New Worlds, where it was, oh, you can tell they're just on the ship, they're just only using ship sets, they're not going down to a planet. And it stands out more when you watch the new series, especially when there's only like 8 or 10 episodes. It stands out when it's like, oh, they're not going to a planet this week. But it was extremely common in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, etc. And I thought this was actually a really good episode, even though it is one of those more internal discussions, cerebral, literally just using the sets that we've all seen before, except for the brig, which was the first time they showed the Voyager brig on the series. But I mean, aside from that, it's the same old sets. We're not going anywhere. We're not encountering any new species or anything like that. It's just this moral conundrum. And I actually thought, all things considered, it was really good. I understand budgets are different with the new shows nowadays, so you're not going to have a 15 or 20 episode season. But I miss, this. I know I'm a broken record because I've been saying this a lot the last year or two on various podcasts. There's something about having the constraints of budget or sets or locations that forces writers to think what they can do in that limited sandbox. And I'm just a big fan, not just of Star Trek, but in a lot of things, of writers or creators trying to work within constraints, because it's just amazing what you can pull off. Because I actually quite like this episode. For you two who don't know, I have often said that Voyager was my least favorite Star Trek series of the pre-Paramount Plus CBS All Access days. It was always my least favorite, and I was usually not looking forward to someone bringing up a Voyager episode on this podcast. That said, I thought this was great.
Yeah. All right. So I'll jump in here because it's tough on me and Eric because we want to say so much, and at the same time we're trying to stay on the episode. So to answer very briefly one thing that Eric brought up, and I guess it kind of gets back to what you were asking about, Sean. There is a pattern with Voyager. Unfortunately, Voyager came at the tail end of the mid-era Star Trek series. Long story short, it had a tighter budget than pretty much any of the other ones prior. Next Gen, DS9. Voyager had a small budget. There were a ton of bottle episodes of Voyager where it's just on the ship. And given the whole premise of the show, you can sense how it could become a bit claustrophobic, where you're always on board this tiny ship and you're trying to deal with things among the crew. You all picked a very good episode because Meld addressed a ton of stuff that had been problematic about the series and in multiple ways. Suter is a very interesting character. And I have always liked his character. And guess what, newbies? He comes back. This is not the only time we see him. So he's going to be in other episodes. And the other episodes he's in are very good. So staying within this episode, Suter is a very interesting character. This idea of, a traumatized Betazoid that is, also a murderer. Very interesting stuff. The premises of finally delving more deeply into the concept of Vulcan mind melds, right? All throughout Star Trek, we have known this ability that Vulcans have had to be able to, reach into other people's minds. And you wonder, what are the edges of that ability? What is that power? What can they really do? This is one of the first times we really, delve into what is going on during a mind meld, what effect it has on Vulcans. Surprisingly, even Neelix sets things up very well in this episode at the very beginning, where he's talking, and as usual, annoying Tuvok, but even in the normal annoyance from Neelix, which throughout the series is perhaps not always welcome, in this episode it is very pertinent, because he brings up early in the episode the idea that, hey, in Vulcan history, Vulcans are not cold, pure, logical beings. They have adopted a discipline that they are trying to control their emotions, and this is a part of their culture. He brings us up. The fact that he's taunting Tuvok is very interesting in this episode, because he always does. But this time we actually see Tuvok have enough of it. The fact that he talks about the pagan ritual that the Vulcans were engaged in. He's saying all of this, not in his normal annoying way where, Neelix is just trying to annoy Tuvok, but he's setting up the history, a necessary history of Vulcan culture, to give you the importance of what's about to go down. That's rare. In Voyager episodes, to have Neelix doing something useful, for it to come together so tightly. So look how this episode plays out. It starts out with Neelix giving us the history of Vulcan psychology. We delve into what mind melds are all about and what impact it has, not just on the Vulcans, but on the people that they meld with. We delve into the psychology of this killer and its nature versus nurture. Look at all this stuff that's happening in this one episode that happens on board the ship, inside the ship. They don't go anywhere. Very interesting stuff. And they keep it interesting. So yes, there's a lot.
So true. But I want to say, when I was watching this yesterday, and as soon as the Neelix scene started, I felt exactly like Tuvok. Like, the whole time watching it, like, oh, this guy, oh, come on. But Carl's spot on.
Yeah. Throughout the series, Neelix has a mixed level of appreciation from the fans. Let's just say that. So when I say that this episode does a lot of things, we have seen Neelix in the past just be a little over enthusiastic.
Yeah.
This time, in this episode, his enthusiasm and it actually has a purpose. It actually has context.
Okay.
Carl, didn't we already watch and discuss the episode Tuvix on this podcast?
I can't remember if we did that, but yeah, it's
I feel like we did. Yeah, an episode where Neely.
wait, hang on. Let's let the crew, because they may not have seen this one yet. So,
Okay.
So let's give them a chance to appreciate it.
Okay, let me say something, because I had some opening thoughts listening to you guys. I too got really excited when I saw that Brad Dourif was going to be in this episode, because I too have been a fan of him since forever.
Well, you didn't know he played Chucky, so I'm just saying.
I haven't seen any Chucky movies.
What?
Well,
All right,
there we go.
one thing at a time.
I know. Yeah.
Add it to the list.
Mhm.
But for whatever reason, I always loved, right out the box in the 80s, I always loved Brad Dourif in Dune, of all things, as Piter. And I always thought that character was so interesting.
Give your RBG bingo card, check off Dune.
I'm just saying, I always found his character so fascinating in David Lynch's version, and Piter is never that interesting in any of the other versions. And even in the book, he's not, well, he is a little bit interesting, but not as much as he is on screen in the 84 movie. And I've loved him every time he's popped up in anything. He was in a bunch of X-Files episodes too, wasn't he? But also, especially thinking of Piter and Dune, he seemed like the perfect person to play Wormtongue in the Lord of the Rings films. Absolutely perfect.
He's really great, and I think, a lot of people that kind of look like that would get typecast to be playing, like, I don't know how to say this, the special person, which is ironic because that's how he started his career, playing a special person.
Yes.
In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yes, I had never seen that movie until we covered it on the Best Picture podcast. I had no idea he was in it, and he has a very pivotal role.
Yeah.
And that role really sets the stage for the roles he would play. And in a way, typecast, but in a way, interesting and different every time he plays that type of unbalanced character. So brilliant. And then weirdly in my head, because going back to the 90s Trek, if there was, if I had like a favorite reoccurring guest star, definitely Barkley was always a big one for me from TNG. And obviously
him.
played by Murdoch, or I can't remember his first name, but the actor Schultz.
Dwight
Schultz. And I loved him in Star Trek because I loved A-Team. But Barkley is just interesting. And then weirdly, I'm thinking about it now, because seeing Dourif, I could see him being like Schultz's cousin.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, in a weird way, I see them as like these two amazing reoccurring guest stars in Star Trek. They got to be, if I had a Mount Rushmore of recurring guest stars in Trek, those two would definitely be on it for me. Yeah. So, and just perfect. And then one last thing I'll say about him and his performance, or maybe his appearance, doesn't it look like his eyes are dilated the whole episode?
Yes.
Okay.
Really huge and saucer-like.
Okay. No. Remember, I mean, he's got that going on because he's got the wily serial killer energy about him. But Betazoids have contacts in. If you're Beta, they have contacts.
Boy, like that?
Yes, they're all like that. So
I never noticed that.
Look again. Yes, they have dark contacts in, so you don't see irises on Betazoids. Yeah, they're all
OMG.
Yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
And I was watching the scene because it was playing when he was talking to Tuvok in his quarters, and the lighting is very dark and shadowy. And yeah, Tuvok's eyes are pitch black also, but his pupils are smaller. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't sure if it just was a lighting thing, or maybe Dourif is like naturally has these huge irises, or
that's a Beta Z thing, Betazoid thing.
Oh my gosh! But okay, and I'll pass the torch in a second, or the conch, or the communicator,
the talking stick,
because his eyes look so huge. Okay, I didn't remember this plot, when I was watching it yesterday. So it was kind of, the actual story itself was new to me, almost like I was a first timer myself. And, I'm pretty sure, yeah, me and Carl are both like this. As soon as we start watching some random sci-fi episode of a series, but especially Star Trek, our gears are turning, trying to figure this out. What episode does this remind me of before? Where do I think this is going? And I was convinced for almost 3/4 of the runtime that some alien entity or virus or something had got into Dorif. And I just kept waiting for the reveal or for Tuvok to start uncovering. And it just never. And the saucer eyes made me think that there was some type of possession going on as well.
I thought exactly the same thing. And I have to apologize to Caleb, who is editing this. When we talked about Brad Dourif's other roles, I didn't mention The Exorcist Part 3. Which I thought of that watching this, of, one guy visiting the other one in prison and then doing some sort of ritual to talk to the demon inside. I have a question. The character of Chakotay, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Is he Native American, or is he of a race that's sort of inspired by Native American culture?
He's supposed to be. Yeah, he's Native American. That's what his character is. Yes.
And also, I want to apologize to Caleb, because if he was here, this would be the second podcast in a row the second feature in a row featuring a member of the cast of Night of the Comet.
Nice.
Because when he was on our Murder, She Wrote podcast, the guy, Jeffrey something, that played one of the bad guys in that movie was in our Murder, She Wrote episode.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah,
a lot of weird connections on podcasts we've done before or recently with this episode.
As my close personal friend Jim Harold would say, it's too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence.
Where were we?
Ike, what else? What else did you? I mean, you like the murder aspect of it. Dark Dorif, that's awesome. What else did you think?
I think Dorif brings a really solid performance to the end, and really does feel like a tragic character, given that he's dealing with these, I don't know, this thing inside of him, this force. Whether it's obviously not a virus, but just whatever these emotions or this pent up frustration, this what would you even call it? His I don't want to go to the id, the ego, and the super ego, but it's almost like his. Could you imagine if he got caught in a transporter and there's two versions of him, and this is his id version, like that episode from DOS? That'd be funny.
Oh yeah,
It's not.
Absolutely could imagine that.
Yeah,
it's kind of like that, where his id, the violent nature, is just unleashed, and he's trying to keep it at bay. It's like there's a other half of him is missing, and I do like that he brings up some thoughts on the meld itself, the mind meld itself. He brings up these notions that he doesn't automatically go with it's a salvation aspect, for it's a way for him to, maybe this is a cure, or at least I can figure out a way to maybe keep all this pent up frustration under control. But he also mentions the other aspect of it, of invasion. Almost, there's another word we could bring up, but I will not use that word. But yeah, the invasive side of.
Oh, okay. They do it in the Enterprise, vis-a-vis mind melds.
Okay, you know what I mean by that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's I was saying earlier that this episode does a lot of things, and you all brought up a couple of really important points. Up until this point, and again, given the fact that it was the 90s, Voyager had been very safe. And your expectation that, he's possessed by an alien or something like that is the reason why he's behaving this way would have been a safe out for the show, right? The alien flies out of him, and then he's back to the normal crew member that we all know and love. That's not what went down. And for, again, yet another thing that made this an important episode is that it started to make Voyager less safe. in terms of who these characters were and what their motivations were. Everybody was, like I said, they have terrorists and the Starfleet aboard the same ship. They didn't really, bring out the tension and the problems that could result from that. And so Voyager was for a long time feeling like a very safe place. And then all of a sudden, you got a murderer on board. I mean, like a literal straight up murderer on board. And when you've got this kind of a dark character, it is also tempting to make him bad for no reason. Just we need someone bad here. We're going to make him bad for no reason. Okay. Now, admittedly, they kind of do that with him, but here's what's interesting. They really actually delve into the psyche of what would motivate someone this way and how it is a plausible kind of illness that is going on with this guy. If we think about Dark Knight, Batman, Dark Knight, and we think about the motivations of the Joker. Now, you could have all kinds of villains in movies and in stories and whatnot, but what really makes it good is if the villain is believable. If the motivations, however evil or disruptive or whatever they are, they're plausible. You can kind of say, okay, well, I can see what's going on with that. I can kind of, and again, I'm a fan of order. I like things to be, somewhat more standard and whatnot. The agent of chaos that is the Joker in The Dark Knight, right out the gate, it's too easy to make that cartoony and big and inflated and unrealistic. Dark Knight, the validation, the explanation of the Joker's motivation is plausible. Even as a fan of order, when you're sitting there, I like Batman. I want things. When you sit across the table from the Joker and Dark Knight, stuff starts making sense. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. It makes you uncomfortable. Same thing with Suter. In this episode, when you're sitting there and you're trying to figure out, why'd you murder this guy? And they start talking about how, the controls are off. How there's no, the containers are coming undone, and he's just not motivated by that control. And you contrast that with Tuvok's control and all of that. How those two play against each other is really, really powerful in this episode. So, I mean, again, like so much is happening in this one episode, and it's really remarkable, even for specifically for Voyager, that all of this is happening in one episode.
I agree. But also, Carl is now going to spark Eric's story time for a moment.
Oh boy,
because you reminded me of one of my true life anecdotes. So
there should be a theme song for this. True life anecdotes.
Yes, because something Carl just said, brought this to my mind when he was talking about how on Voyager everything was kind of safe, and then this kind of like created this new sense of dread, and this triggered this story. So, back when I worked with the juveniles, most of them, they're all minors. Most of them, they're bad kids, whatever. And most of them would come across as like whatever stereotype you have in your head of what that would be like what the kids are like and how they behave and how they speak. But I remember we got this new kid once, and when you get a new kid in the facility, you never know. It's like a box of chocolates. You really don't know what you're going to get. And we got this new kid, and he was about 15 or so, and he just seemed like he was not like the other kids because he was very well spoken, very groomed himself well, very nice, very polite. He would just say, yes, sir, no, sir. And he was like, whoa, how did this kid end up here? And, a week later, things started to happen and his other side came out. And I remember talking to his therapist to get some background on him before coming to the facility. Because I was like, this kid just seemed great. And now I don't know what's going on. And I remember the therapist saying, yeah, well, this kid in particular, he may be a sociopath. And of course, she wasn't being hyperbolic or at all. She was, speaking as a professional. And I was like, really? Why? And because she said that him and his sibling were adopted young by some rich family and had like a really great upbringing, and that he like killed the family horse. And I remember she told me that's not something you ever expect to hear. But then tying that in with her saying that he was perhaps a sociopath, I had never really encountered somebody like that before, where I knew their backstory to some extent, and it just made sense to me at that point after like seeing how he had changed and how he'd have these moments where he would just get suddenly violent out of nowhere, and it just made sense. And then this is why Carl made me think of it, because now doing this type of work, it gave me a new sense of dread, because most of the kids, like I said, they're like what you'd expect from a movie as far as being miscreants or whatever. But this kid, because he was so put together and comes across as intelligent and is so nice, and then has this other side that is almost unpredictable, I had this new sense of apprehension, fear, or whatever in my workplace. And so now whenever anyone brings up that word in conversation when they mean it seriously, I get kind of like, whoa, what are we talking about now? So
it doesn't have to be of a violent nature. I used to work for a sociopath, and yeah, he wasn't violent at all, but the things he said and did were, I learned later on, are very indicative of a sociopath.
Yeah.
But don't ask me what the difference is between a psychopath and a sociopath. Somebody explained it to me one time, and it was kind of complicated, and I was like, well, look at the squirrel.
I'll tell you later.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just very interesting, because I never would, especially when I saw this in the 90s, I didn't have thoughts like this watching Star Trek or anything back then. But when Carl said it now, it just kind of like reframed the whole Voyager dynamic for me now.
The final fight, and I say that with the double air quotes, between Suter and Tuvok. Suter, now with his newly controlled Vulcan, energy, trying to contain his emotions, and Tuvok now lacking the control and sort of exploring the emotional, psychotic nature of what Suter.
And he actually says to Suter, all you have to do is just act it out in the holodeck. They're like, okay, dude, that's really creepy. You shouldn't be doing that.
Well, I mean, but remember, he had just done that,
yeah,
so and it was not a healthy experience at all. But again, like the Batman Joker moment, when those two are going at it, and they are, when Tuvok comes back into the brig, presumably to kill Suter, partially to satisfy his emotional need to do so, partially to use justice as a cover for that. There's a moment where the two of them are, together. The Tuvok's got him, and they're melding brains and minds and whatnot. But let's know what they're saying to each other, because what's really interesting is Suter, despite his history, is trying to counsel Tuvok in his newly acquired, damaged emotional state. Mm-hmm. And what's the fight that I say, again with the air quotes, between the two of them, is that Suter is appreciating the control that Tuvok has given him, and he sees, the problems that would result from continuing on his path. And now he sees and understands that Tuvok has these kind of feelings that, either he's given them or are coming out late in Vulcan, emotional feelings. Those two are trying to resolve the extremes of their behavior at the same time. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Suter is counseling Tuvok through it the way that Tuvok was supposed to have been counseling Suter. So there's a bit of a backhanded redemption for Suter, because Suter could have just succumbed and died, and then he knew that Tuvok would be in prison and would lose everything. He's in that moment going, look, Tuvok, you can do what you want to do, buddy, but if you go down this path, this is what's coming for you, and this is what you're going to have to live with. Are you sure this is what you want? And so to see them fighting that way, psychologically, again, very, very interesting dynamic that they've created. And to have a fight that's not a physical fight and yet have this kind of gravity. Very impressive. Very impressive for this.
I don't know if anyone has to say anything about this, but I'm going to switch gears for just a second. Does anybody have any thoughts on the B plot?
Oh, jeez.
I mean, it's so light compared to.
We did not need it. It was. Is that the holodeck, or do they actually have a bar?
No. It's the holodeck.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, what do we think about Paris and Kim and the whole gambling ring? And should they be allowed to gamble on the ship? Is Tuvok, does he just have his knickers in a bunch?
Chakotay?
I'm sorry, Chakotay.
Mm-hmm.
Chakotay.
Now, okay, so again, I just want to point out the B plot is more aligned with what you might typically experience in the early seasons of Voyager. So whole episodes about exploring that kind of thing is some of the other things that you have to look forward to. It was fortunately a very small B plot here, and and getting chastised by your commanding officer for that kind of foolishness when you're the only ship out there.
That's true.
There's nobody else. Where are they going to send them? It's just like yeah.
Okay,
Riker would have looked the other way. He'd be like, oh.
Yeah, I can see that.
There's a smile.
I know nobody cares, but I'm still curious because at the beginning of the grift, I couldn't tell if Harry was already in on it from the very start, like when they were playing pool, and
the quick answer is no.
Okay, I wasn't sure because it almost seemed like they had cooked this up ahead of time.
Yeah, no.
And they were going to grease the wheels.
Harry is supposed to be that naive. So,
okay,
yeah.
And so that's another thing. If you watch a lot of these episodes of Voyager, now I get the B plot was kind of a distraction from the main course of this episode.
The main what?
But for me, having seen this show in virtually its entirety, there was something nostalgic about the antics of Paris and Kim, because they're always like, what's their names? Gildersleeve and Rosencrantz in Hamlet. Like, just the two oddballs having their own little side adventures concurrent with whatever Voyager's actually dealing. They're always doing silly boy things, and Paris is always the bad influence, and Kim is always like the wide-eyed doe who just goes along with everything.
You're saying they're the Scooby and Shaggy of Star
Yes,
Trek.
yes, they are. Yes, they are. Very much.
That's good. That's
yes, 100%. And so it is silly, but the nostalgia factor of like, wow, we have these heavy things going on, and these two dimwits are trying to run a gambling ring in the holodeck. I actually found the levity kind of welcoming amongst everything else going on.
Yeah, that's interesting. You bring up a good point, because I don't know if this was in the series the first time that we see that level of shenanigans, but it expands. Their foolishness just becomes bigger as the series goes on. So
Big Finish could do this whole audio series just dedicated to those two doing ridiculous things, their own adventures.
Oh, please don't mention Big Finish.
Big Finish, get on that.
I'm trying to sell all my Big Finish CDs on eBay. Anyway, okay. Nobody wants them.
Wow. First you sell the Next Generation. You're going to regret this one day.
Nobody wants them. Okay. Sorry.
So sad. Ike.
Yes.
We're starting to wind down on the story, I think. But more thoughts on the plot, or are you excited to watch more Voyager or check out other Trek series you have yet to see?
I mean, I will say, if we do another, if I'm allowed back on at some point, I would like to. Sorry, I don't know. Maybe I broke some rules. I'm not exactly sure about this.
Send out the hounds.
Oh crap! Don't want to be Borged. I would like to do this probably should be cut. I would like to do the other episodes with Suter in it, given that we already started the first one. Might as well just finish it, because I know he's not always a part of this show.
Well, if we ever get back on a more regular recording schedule for RBG, yeah, we usually take turns.
I see. Okay.
Recommending whatever you want to choose from anything televised Trek. It's just we have a couple others on the on deck,
Of course.
and yeah, but it'll always come back around, and you get to choose anything you want for whatever reason you want.
So there you go. Those are my next 2 picks of whenever like Suter is involved in the plot. I'd like to watch those episodes at the time. Anyway, so to answer your question, anything else with the plot? What do you guys think of the ending and his Suter's sentence? What do you think of him being incarcerated in, was it maybe I'm getting this wrong, solitary confinement, was it?
Well, he's gonna get restricted quarters for
There
the
you
rest of the flight.
Yeah.
So house arrest.
Yes.
When they say restricted to quarters, do they mean him just sitting in that cell with nothing but a bench?
No. His actual quarters. Yeah, it's like house arrest.
Okay. All right. I'm pretty much as liberal as a trans abortion doctor. I'm going to say that is fair, given his, crime. I mean, he fucking killed a guy. I mean, that's pretty much the worst thing you can do. I mean, you could kill more guys, but it's suitable. They did touch on the topic of capital punishment for a moment there, but they didn't go too deep. Whether or not they should carry out his wishes and kill him or execute him, and also taking into consideration, what was it, the victim had with 3 sisters or something like that. That was interesting. I like that. I'm going to make one complaint. And this is not the fault of the episode, because I know she's on the show a lot more, but I was sad that there wasn't more Captain Janeway. I wanted to see more of her. Because I like the actress. I mean, she's Mrs. Columbo, and she's Red from Orange is the New Black. But that's not the fault of the episode.
You'll get your opportunity.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
no doubt about it.
The sentence is interesting because, and even Tuvok brings it up in the episode. Is this legitimate? Is this acceptable? We got to think about the sisters. You're sucking up resources on a teeny ship way out in space by itself. You're just, kind of taking up space. Is this really something that satisfies the justice of the situation? The good questions and tough questions to ask. The idea, just this dude's sitting in his quarters for a decades long trip back. Some might say that doesn't make a lot of sense.
But I think when we talk about the B plot with the gambling ring, maybe if we had more of Janeway pondering whether she should execute him or not.
Well, okay, so I will simply say this. The arc of this series really is all about Janeway and her single ship trying to maintain the ideals of Starfleet when she is out by herself, no Starfleet to return. I mean, to check what she's doing, and how tempting it is to maybe bend the rules, or how tempting it is, in this case, not do the Starfleet thing. You will see throughout the series that she is tested repeatedly that way. So although in this episode we see very briefly, not a lot of Janeway in it, and that she has made this decision to keep him alive, it is resonating with the common theme of this series, that she's got to make these decisions, is it really the Starfleet thing to do? It would be so much easier. And in this case, it makes a lot more sense if we but she, as the sole commanding officer, has to maintain the ideals of Starfleet even under extraordinarily extreme circumstances. And there is a tension across the series about that with her. So Even though we don't see a lot of her in this one episode, the touchstone and is the arc of the series that she's always got to be dealing with that. So you'll get more of that elsewhere in this.
So weird. You guys are making me want to watch more Voyager. This is...
Well, you said you want to come back for Suitor episodes. What do you think? Are you gonna watch all of the episodes, including those, or you just want to see the Suitor ones?
Good question, actually. I probably should do that. I don't know when he returns, so it'd be... I guess I'll have to, even though he's not... unless he gets like a... because in a way, they actually have like a good... I don't know if they go with this, but it's like they could have Tuvok, and he has a new friend, I guess. Maybe not a friend, but he has somebody to confide with, given that he shares a similar emotional experience, potentially. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine if Tuvok goes to see Suitor as not like an anti-Hannibal, where, like, you know, Suitor's not Hannibal. He's not trying to get free. He's not trying to kill. It's just something that just happens to him. So it'd be nice to, like, if Tuvok's feeling down or something like that, he would go to Suitor instead of having to go to the holodeck and I guess play out his fantasies or to try and suppress these violent tendencies that he now has. So it'll be interesting if they do that with him, like from now until whenever Suitor shows up next. But that's just my guess. I don't know if they do that or not.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. I will simply say you get a bit of what you're looking for. A bit of that comes back. So
interesting
that, you know, and again, Suitor is one of my favorite, you know, secondary characters. So, I have my opinions about early season Voyager, but, you know, if you plan on watching it, you may want to stick through some of the slower episodes, because there's, you know, the context is more meaningful when you see what's going on and what's happening, you know, why he's important and what's going on, like you said, with Tuvok and him. So it might be worth, you know, sitting down and watching some of the early episodes leading into these. So, but, you know, again, it's up to you. Voyager is, you know, like I said, sometimes it's a little slow in the beginning, but I think if you're a fan of Suitor, that sometimes the arc of his character might make it worth watching all of them leading through that.
Noted.
So we're getting close to rating, so start thinking of your units of measure, and you'll still have time to give final thoughts when you rate. But did anyone notice? I didn't notice this until I read it on IMDb in preparation. But the crewman who Suitor murders or deletes, yes. Did you guys notice, or, you know, when Tuvok asked him, you know, where was crewman so and so, you know, when you were on shift, what his station was, the victim station in engineering?
No.
He was working at the impulse control
system
panel.
French
very
champagne.
Very clever. I didn't pick up on that.
And the crew member that dies early on, that guy, his name was Darwin.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, dude. Yeah. I remember. Oh,
Did
I
he
noticed.
get an award?
Why is it called Darwin? Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. I get it. Yeah, I mean, I have more final thoughts, but what's our unit of measure for this one? How many?
5 gambling rings out of whatever.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Out of 5 gambling rings. I'll go ahead and kick things off, but I will say I see here on Wikipedia, according to Screen Rant, they listed this episode in their top 5 Voyager episodes ever. So Meld made their top 5 for this series.
It's a good one.
It is a good one, surprisingly. I mean, just because, you know, I have bias just because it's Voyager, but Voyager has been continuing to surprise me upon revisits. And also, I was going to say in opening statements that, especially in the early days of Voyager, I was always excited when there was a Tuvok-centric episode, because when they announced before the show debuted, you know, who the crew was going to be and what they would consist of, this idea of this new Vulcan character, I was just primed to enjoy him. So every week I was just, more Tuvok. Like I just wanted him to be like my favorite on this series. So this was that was a bonus going into this. Obviously, I really like it. Strong episode of Voyager. I just, especially in the newer series that are coming out, I would love to see some type of writing of dealing with issues that really compels you, because they have covered very interesting subjects in Strange New Worlds. It's just whatever the big subject of the week is, it feels like an attachment, like, because Strange New Worlds, so much of it is like carrying on like the arc of the season. So like a certain percentage of a Strange New Worlds episode will be dedicated to advancing the arc. And then it's almost like they have a plug and play system for the moral of the week. And they have covered some interesting subjects, but because it's like a plug and play, it feels like they could almost plug in whatever moral. And so it gets addressed, but it doesn't usually feel like it lingers and gets like in your mind, like thinking about it later, because at least my mind lingers more on what's the new revelation with Uhura or Nurse Chapel and Spock, that whatever the moral dilemma is often takes like second billing in the newer shows. And so it would be cool to have like something heavy hitting like this, or whatever that is. And yeah, okay, so out of gambling rings, I'm just going to go easy. I mean, I'm not going to overthink it. I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 gambling rings. And for you noobs or anyone else who hasn't seen the purportedly for kids animated series Prodigy, I'm only on the 2nd episode of season 2 right now, but that show is essentially like the ongoing like Voyager adjacent sequel. And so I strongly suggest, if you're one of those old time fans who loves Voyager, you really should give Prodigy a chance. There's more of Columbo's wife and other things. And that show gets really good. Once you get past like the 3-part opener, which makes you feel like the show's not for you as an old Trekkie, once you get past that, it really starts to get interesting.
I just want to second you on that, back you up. That show, Prodigy, does some very remarkable things. Prodigy starts as a kid show, and it straight up feels Nickelodeon when you're watching the first couple of episodes. It really doesn't feel like Star Trek. And you go, what is going on here? And then I am telling you, it does this massive 180, and it becomes more Trek than a lot of other stuff that's out. So, Eric, you have not seen beyond the first couple of episodes of season 2. I've seen the whole thing. So I am telling you, and other fans, particularly fans of Voyager, that Eric is absolutely correct, that Prodigy, once again, right, there's always the break. I told you, there's always something. You watch the first couple of episodes, and then you're watching Nickelodeon. You're like, what? And then all of a sudden, it hardcore becomes Star Trek. And it is shocking, the transition in the series.
Completely shocking.
It is. It's like, why? What were they doing before? Anyway,
well, they were trying to lull like innocent young kids in.
I don't like the way you're setting that up.
Yeah, and then it was like a bait and switch, but in the best possible way.
Yeah. So again, if you haven't seen it, or you've seen only 1 or 2 episodes, we sound like crazy people. But I'm telling you, Prodigy surprisingly becomes Star Trek hardcore, and Eric is absolutely right. It does pick up from in the Voyager type characters and whatnot. So,
who's next, Sean?
I'm also going to give it a 4 out of 5. As I explained, I really enjoyed this. I thought it had some good messages. The only things I didn't like about it were the stupid gambling ring B-plot and that horrible reference to Silence of the Lambs. Ugh! But Brad Dourif gets 5 stars, however. So yeah, I've said my piece, and I think that's it.
Ike, hit it.
Yes, sir. Not to, copy off of your guys' homework, but yeah, I think I'll also give it a 4 out of 5. Yes, because of the B plot that
I like the B plot. It's a breather.
I won't say it's unnecessary, but it's just like I do lament. Yeah, I wish there was more. The B plot was maybe like with other characters dealing with the current situation as well. Like it was, maybe the sisters or whatever it was. They were like talking about like as humorous as it sounds, the crewman who did get killed. I wish they would have like maybe dealt with that as well as like the B plot potentially. But whatever. I'm not here to remake it. Yeah, no, the big arguments, the debates, the conflict that occurs in this episode between like and actually like addressing a meld and the setbacks or side of the unfortunate consequences of said mind meld. We actually address that here, or at least see it up front, and it does lead to some interesting exchanges going down. And we do have a character, yes, as I said, Brad Dourif, who's gives a wonderful performance, and this I have to recommend this one to anybody else who just don't even start from like the pilot. Just watch this one like out of sequence, and without knowing anything at all other than like listening to us and the explanations of the backstory. That's it. Next, Carl, please take it away. Finish this off here.
Yeah. I'm with the crew here. I'm giving it 4, and it's a high 4. Again, it does so much as an episode. It really, it is quite extraordinary for a Voyager episode that they put so much in it. And like I said, it was stuff that needed to be done in the series, not just within the episode. They, needed to see more of Tuvok. They needed to, somebody needed to put Neelix down a little. I mean, that stuff needed to be done, and for it to all happen in one episode is pretty remarkable. Very strong character development, very interesting stuff you wanted to know about, historically and with these characters. And it creates a good foundation for things that are going to come afterwards. So I agree. 4.
All right.
4 across the board.
Yeah. Please, no wagering.
Yeah.
This is an exhibition, not a competition.
Exactly.
And before we close out, somehow what I'm about to say reminded me of that episode of Strange New Worlds where there's that alien race that reflects who you are back at you. Like that's their way of empathy. And because I was thinking, not to just mention politics briefly again, like this idea of the way the mind meld works in this episode, being essentially the ultimate empathy of almost literally, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Like, what if we somehow could replicate that in our world now, like with divisiveness all over the place, at least in this country, politically speaking? Like, what if people could really transpose? I just think it would be fascinating, what could come out of that. But anyway, stay tuned. More new episodes coming on the feed, and we will be diving into, this was discussed off air, but we will be jumping back into the animated series, probably coming up next on this feed, so stay tuned for that. But closing out the show today, this is Eric.
This is Carl.
This is Sean.
This is Red Shirt Ike.
And until next time,
my name is Khan.
Beware Romulans bearing gifts.
Tries to make a does a Benedict Cumberbatch impression. My name is Khan.
Oh dear. Well, definitely no one's ever said that before. Oh dear.
Yeah, Steve and I were asked to be on this thing and talk about Murder by Death on YouTube, and it was live, like on a Sunday night, and it was so weird. It was like watching Twitch where people could comment on what you're talking about.
Yep.
But I just felt really awkward, and it just stressed me out so much up to that moment that I was gonna, I'm like, okay, I can't touch my nose. I better put the whiskey in a coffee cup. Ugh, it was very nerve-wracking.
What was nerve-wracking?
Steve and I were on this thing on YouTube. This little some guy that listens to our podcast asked us to be on his show, and so we're like, okay. And it was all visual and live on YouTube. I don't know why that's funny, but I'll just let it go.
Because of you and your anxiety, and you say you get distracted when you see my beautiful face when I put video on Skype.
I remember one time Eric accidentally turned on the video, and I was like, "Hey, Eric, I can see you." And you know that scene in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles when he's in the airport near the beginning and he sees John Candy's face in the cab door, and like he does that surprised look? That's the face that Eric made.
I actually
that's
haven't
right.
seen that
Okay.
movie.
That's funny.
You've never seen that movie?
Nope. But I've seen 2 John Candy movies recently, and I hadn't seen him in anything in years or probably decades. And I watched Home Alone for the first time a couple weeks ago.
Really?
Polka
And
King.
Yeah, I didn't know he was in it. And as soon as he came on, I was like, man, I miss this guy being in movies so much. And like that was the highlight of the whole movie for me.
Like,
and
have you ever seen JFK, where he plays a nasty ass lawyer?
A scumbag.
I've seen JFK, but I didn't remember him in the movie.
Oh, everybody's in that movie.
I need to watch it
I
again.
don't know if that's a good thing or not.
Yeah, and then I watched Cool Runnings for the first time right after Home Alone.
You mean Michael Moore's directorial?
That's Michael Moore?
Yeah, Michael Moore directed it. You know what?
Movie.
I need to I heard this from Bald Brian. This is Bald Brian that said this.
I never knew he made a non-documentary film, if that's true. No, it's not.
Didn't he make Canadian Bacon as well? Or is that something?
Oh, it's Canadian Bacon. I'm so sorry. It's Canadian Bacon.
Oh, okay.
Not Cool Runnings.
No, what's nutty about Cool Runnings, so it's like a Disney/Buena Vista release, and it feels like it, I mean, for the year that it's 93, yes. And it's a pretty low-budget film, and it is what it is, and the music is pretty corny, like you'd expect for a movie from Disney from that time. And then the credits roll, and it says music by Hans Zimmer. And I almost spit out my milk. Shocking. I mean, he made good stuff. I mean, dude, he did Lion King. But
he did Doctor in Distress.
Well, he had a hand in it. But yeah, Cool Runnings has to be one of his most unknown scores. Yeah, very shocking.
So it's probably been a while since you've listened to it, but did you hear anything of like, DNA that'll be in like, his future scores?
I'd have to go back and listen because it just sounded like low budget, like stereotypical Disney movie, like straight to television, 1993 music. Like there was nothing. It just sounded like everything else for a movie like that back then. But except for the part when that didn't happen.
Clearly, dubstep was invented in 93.
Oh yeah, Sean, did anything happen? Or December 1st? Is that anything vis-a-vis Doctor Who?
No.
For some reason, I noticed these posts by random, or in our Doctor Who circles, people just on December 1st, like saying, "Oh, Doctor Who's great, love Doctor Who," and it made me think that maybe the special was supposed to come out December 1st, and I didn't know it. But yeah, I don't know.
I'm not really the best person to ask about that. Doesn't it usually come out on Christmas Eve, or did it kind of lose?
Christmas Day, usually, because if you get relegated to Christmas Eve, that means you're not. It may have happened once or twice, where it was like the 23rd or the 26th, but that means you're not top tier.